Welcome to Bring Out Your Badass Self, a movement to break your negative thoughts and habits and instead focus on building each other up and encouraging fearless authenticity.
Each week, we will get vulnerable and share experiences alongside our guests and audience. Come rediscover your inner badass self.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be back to a routine.
Even badasses need routines, right?
They really do. My husband and I just really missed each other on some levels and then didn't miss each other on other levels. So
Go on.
Yeah, so I came back and like he misses cuddling with me and everything. This morning he was like, "Good morning." And I was like, "Hey." And he was like, "I did not sleep whatsoever." He was like, "You were snoring." I was like, "I am sorry." So whenever I'm congested, I tend to snore. And so he goes, "And then the moment I thought I was going to fall asleep, you then touched me." Like I reached out to him, like I touched him, and I woke him up and he was like, "What?"
Oh my gosh, that's so hard, right? And you can't do anything about it. You were sleeping. So you feel, like if I could not do that while I was sleeping, I would, I promise you.
I know. So this morning he had to leave early. And of course, he took care of everything. He took care of even leaving early. He took care of Riley, getting her lunch together and everything. But I sent him a message and I was like, "I just wanted you to know how much I love you and how much I appreciate you." And I said, "I'm sorry that I was congestion and it made me snore. And therefore it gave you a rough night's sleep." I'm like, I hope at some point today you'll be able to get a nap, but either way, I hope you have a wonderful day. And so he was like, "I love you too."
So, well, how about our audience? Did anyone get a rough night of sleep or a good night of sleep?
Well, Bruce says he's ready.
Is ready. Yes. I had got a rough night of sleep, but that's not unusual for me. But I think I stayed up too late. I was too excited. I was writing and doing some other stuff, so I just stayed up too late, and that sometimes screws me up too. Like get out of my rhythm. So
yeah.
But I don't think I kept anyone awake. We shall see. I get a report mid-morning typically on, whether I moved too much or I was screwing with my CPAP or who knows, any number of things. I've literally fallen off the bed, moving. So I'm, a crazy person at night.
Oh my goodness. So you get a report?
Not really. I'm just teasing, but Jenna will be on the rough night, she will be like, "Hey," the next morning, one time I smacked her, we've done funny things to each other in the middle of the night. So,
I don't know who this is, but someone said rough, horrible coughing, kept myself awake, trying not to cough and wake up my husband. So he got a good night.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's sweet of you. You could try to go to StreamYard.com/Facebook and authorize it to show your name. We've had some struggles with that, but it's lovely to see you guys here. And good morning.
Oh, she said it's Kia. Oh, hey, Kia. And so
hi,
she
Kia.
said, "Weird, it doesn't show my name." Yeah, so Facebook.com/StreamYard. You can do it right now, and then it'll show you moving forward. So welcome, Kia. Kia is actually a neighbor of mine, and I know her through Riley, through a friend, and so they were friends with a friend, and now she's actually in my neighborhood as well. So
nice.
And then someone else that said, good morning, beautiful badasses. So
good morning.
Yeah, so welcome. And so Cate, I got to tell you, yesterday I was exhausted. So
I bet.
So for those that don't know, I went to a conference and I also had something the week before as well. Oh, it looks like it's Kim. And so I went to a conference. It's called ProjectCon, and we just are nonstop. When we go to this conference, my feet were killing me. Like by the time
I bet.
last night, my calves were killing me. My feet are killing me. And I had some unique experiences while we were there. And so I just wanted to sort of share this with you and the audience. And so we had an amazing event. And so for our clients, we did the ice bar, which is actually great for today's topic because it is fire.
Yes.
Polar opposites. And so it was just an extreme. And so it's a great sort of, segue into this particular topic as well, because sometimes fire, you need the heat, you need the warmth, like it can be a good thing. And then other times, like when I was out there dancing and I was just sweating my ass off, I'm like, I need to go into the ice bar.
I need to get to the
ice. And you're just like, oh my God, this feels so good whenever you go in there. But other times people were like, it was way too cold. I was way too cold to be able to go in there.
Really? Yeah. So did not everyone go in and enjoy it? Like, were some people like, I'm not going in?
No, I think most people went in, but sometimes people were like, I was just really cold at the beginning of the night. So I went in there and I was like, oh, I don't want to be in here. So they came out. But then like later on in the night, if they had been dancing, then we go in there and we're just like, oh, this feels so good.
Yes. I can imagine, like, not that I've danced in clubs very often, but the times that I have, I can totally imagine like how great it would be to have like a room full of ice to go into, cool off, and then come back out and dance more.
Yeah, and it was just so cool. They also had ice drinks that had your drink in a cup that was made out of ice. So in there, it was just so cool. And then if you have not seen my post, go out on my page and take a look at it. They had a guy that breathes fire. Like he took in the alcohol and then he had these things that he had on fire and he would blow through it and it would just go off. It was really amazing.
Yeah, I was super intrigued by that and thought it would be really fun to do sometime. Yep. I don't, I loved it.
I do have one other thing to share there as well. So it was funny. I took it all in stride, but it was an awkward situation. So we went to Universal. Deltec paid for everyone to be able to go to Universal. So you got to go through Toons and Jurassic Park and then on up into Harry Potter. So it was quite, they blocked off quite a bit of the park for people to be able to go. So Lindsay's like, all right, let's go all the way in the back. She had been there before. She was like, I go all the way to the back and then I work my way back. So we get in there. I'm going to ride a ride. Like I grew up riding rides. I'm not afraid of them or anything. However, all the way up to the front and we get into the seat and put the thing back. And all of a sudden the lady was like, okay, well, this has to turn green. And she was like, she goes,
was it your boobs?
No. She goes, do you have your butt all the way back? And I go, yep. And she goes, can you pull it any more? So I pulled it a little bit more. And she was like, can you pull it any more? And I was like, nope. And she was like, all right. And she was like, very sweet. Like they have exactly what you're supposed to say to people without going, you're too fat.
Yeah.
And so she was like, all right, I'm going to have you go see my colleague. He's going to check out some things and see what we can do for you, something along those lines. So I was like, all right, do you want to just go on the ride by yourself? She's like, no, I'll go with you. So she goes with me. But then what they did is they take you to these seats to like test it out. And then there were, what we didn't notice at the beginning of one of the other rides, we saw this. It was like our rides accommodate certain body styles.
Yes.
so I just told Lindsay, I was like, Lindsay, let me try to connect you with someone else within our group so you can ride. I felt bad for her. For me, I messaged my husband. I was like, I'm too voluptuous to ride on this ride. And he was he goes, I love your voluptuousness.
Yes. Doesn't matter. Yes.
So I just so there were other people as well. And I have to tell you, there was one particular person that I want to reach out to this person because she said something to me because I had gotten off of the ride and I wasn't able to do it. She was out there with another person and we were talking and I said, I was just too bodacious, I think is the word I used. I said I was just too bodacious to get on the ride. And they were talking and she was talking about getting up and presenting. And she's a fuller woman like me. And she said that she was terrified to get up there to speak because she was worried that people were going to like judge her. And I was like, oh my God, like, girl, like you were amazing. Like she is an expert at her topic. Like she's someone that I actually go to whenever I need like further insight into things. And it just made me feel like, you need to understand the amazing aspects of yourself. And it's actually also a good segue into this because skinny and fat, those are two extremes and people see them as both sometimes negative. Like, well,
right.
She's so fat, she should, you should exercise. Well, that's not always the case. That's not always sometimes the solution for people that are like, and then there's people that are like, I'm too skinny, or people that think that they have to be that in order to be perfect. And so perfectionism. So it's really just, I wanted to sort of talk about that. I also wanted to be vulnerable and just let people know about my experience that you can laugh at it and you can say, what? This is who I am. But you can also see the good in, the things that are also a part of sometimes the black and white thinking that we tend to have.
Yep. Yeah, totally. I had I'm glad that you had, I don't think it was a coincidence that woman was there when you came down and that you were able to kind of, that's going to stick with her. And if you know her, you can follow up with her and connect with her. I will tell you that when I was in my early 20s, I went to Great America with my older brother, his girlfriend, someone else, don't remember who, but, and I don't even remember if it was his girlfriend or not. Maybe it was just some girl, but, I had done a couple of roller coasters successfully, but I was doing another one where like the thing comes down and it was not clicking, was not clicking. And I have another friend who has a hilarious story about this. But the clicks, because what they do, at least at Great America, is what they do is they'll like get in front of you and they'll push, because they want you to ride the ride. And so my friend Kyle, he has this great story about where he's like, he hears this like, as they're trying to push and then click, and he was terrified, absolutely terrified of this ride and didn't feel like he was clicked in as far as he could have been.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, the gentleman that took me off my ride was very sweet and he went the opposite route. But at the time I kind of appreciated it because I was 20. He was like, listen, girl, he's like, that rack you got, it's just not gonna, it's not a go for this ride, but that shit is banging. Like he was really, and I just was like, thank you. I felt, and it did make the whole thing. I did end up feeling kind of bad about it because I had spent my, money and I didn't end up doing as many rides as I wanted to. But but he really worked, hard to, probably inappropriately, but he worked hard to at least make me feel better.
That's okay. Sometimes that's what you need to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
So we got some more people joining. We have Myra. She said, good morning.
Good morning, Myra.
Carmen said, hola, BOYBAS.
I love it.
And then someone said, so love Jay.
I know.
I think that might have been Kim.
Yeah, he's just the best. He's the best.
Well, so what I would like to do, we got another person said, morning ladies, let us know who you are. And so if you go to facebook.com/StreamYard.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah. Is that right? Or is it, no, it's StreamYard.com/Facebook. Sorry, it's StreamYard.
Okay.
/Facebook. And so, yes, she said it was Kim earlier about Jay. And so awesome. Well, we have an amazing topic. I'm really, really excited about today's topic. And so I would like to start, Cate, with your poem.
Sure.
There, could we do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
This is, I've been doing more writing, and I wanted to really work on kind of a really simple poem. And I think it's kind of cute. I like it.
I love it. All right, here we go.
Balance. Like on a beam, or so it may seem, that awkward space, the narrow place, a scary place, between the wrong and the right, the black and the white, the good and the bad, the manic and the mad, the happy and the sad. So much more than life and work, it's there and here and everywhere. It sings to me a harmony. It dances in perfect harmony. Balance is harmony. Feels peaceful in stance, consciousness in a trance. I long for the balance beam, the linear yet risky place in such a beautiful space.
I love it. I also loved the music and the graphics that you put with it. I love the simplicity of it. And and the thing that I love about it, as well as the space that you gave in between the words, because it really allowed me to be able to reflect upon what it is that you were saying. And so today we're going to be talking about ultimately balance. So
yes,
it's a perfect little poem to be able to go into today's topic. So do you want to talk a little bit about, anything as far as like what inspired you or anything further about the poem?
Yeah. Thank you. So first of all, balance has been a huge thing for me in my life. And all of the, therapy and the work that I have done to kind of improve myself and grow. I lived in my head in very extreme places. So I really needed to understand the concept of balance in terms of the way my mind was working, so I'm kind of in love with balance now, I'm in love with the wise mind or the Goldilocks, I'm in love with that middle ground. And I feel so much more comfortable there. So, and then, dancing is something that I did a lot of when I was younger. And so, I've been feeling more drawn to it. And I'm also really drawn to like lyrics and spoken word. And so I'm trying to let myself kind of dig into those little areas, those little passion areas. I usually don't save time for things like that. I work and I family, That's typically what I do. And as my family is getting a little older, I'm finding a little more free time. And so I'm appreciative of this opportunity to kind of share a little bit of what I'm doing on the side. So thank you.
I love it. Now, I also do have to share that Cate had done a collage and she has no idea where the collage. So I'd given Cate a deadline. I was like, all right, because we got Project On. I'm like, have this done. And so she was working on this last night and she had worked on the poem and things like that. But I think it turned out perfectly, Cate. And so
Thank you.
I really loved it. And I know that the other idea was lost, but I also love that this is sort of allowing you the creativity that you want to be able to tap into. So we're going to continue to find more for you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's one of the downsides of living in such a large household is there's so many moving parts. I literally had a collaging project out, and then like 2 or 3 days later, that room was trashed because somebody else had some project or something going on, and no one can find this piece of art that I did. And on top of that, I'm missing like articles of clothing and other things. I think like from the history, like I would just like was removed from like the household duties for a bit there, and like I think just the little mix up, it's just got some things gone awry. So I'm going to have to go into each kid's bedroom and search through their clothes to find stuff that I'm looking for, I think. I have no idea.
Well, I think that it turned out to be something that was meant to be. So maybe you were supposed to do something different, which is getting into the poem aspect of things.
Yeah, totally. It feels right.
So I'm not sure who this is. I know Leslie is also on. She said she doesn't remember her Facebook password to be able to do the StreamYard.com. But someone else said, love it. So thank you for that feedback for Cate. And so let's jump into today's topic. So what is the Goldilocks way of thinking? And so we have, everyone's heard of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And so the children's story of it's too hot, it's too cold, oh, it's just right. And so I'm not sure who wouldn't know that particular story, but I never really thought of this particular story being along these lines until actually I got further into the Goldilocks way of thinking. And she's actually in really good company. And so Aristotle actually coined the term golden mean, and Buddha used the term middle way, and Confucius outlined the doctrine of the mean. And so all of these are really just different words for the same idea.
Right. Yep. Yeah. It's zeroing in on that kind of sweet spot in life. Right. And as we'll kind of talk through, there's so many opportunities to find, your sweet spot, as challenging as it may be.
Yeah. And so ultimately the Goldilocks way of thinking is a solution for black and white thinking. And it is the ability to find that sweet spot between opposite extremes. So we talked about some of those already from my example of just Project Con. So fire and ice and skinny and not so skinny.
Yes.
And I know that, dialect, that was one of the things that you also wanted to mention as well, because all of these words mean different things, but yet they're the same.
Yeah, exactly. So dialectical in nature is really like where you can be kind of, both can exist, it's a process, but both can exist together. And I use it a lot, or it's kind of in my mind often because of the therapy that I use that has been really helpful to me, the dialectical behavioral therapy. So that's where I kind of learned the word dialectical, because otherwise I thought of a dialect like German or French,
right.
I didn't really think of it in terms of balance.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about why this is important. And so before we sort of dive in deep, I want to give a little bit of a warning. And so, warning, Will Robbins, danger, danger. So you might get triggered at the beginning of this show. And so I just want to give a little bit of warning. So keep your mind open as we start to talk about of some of these things, because a lot of times our ego tends to sometimes get in the way because we grew up a particular way or we have a particular way of thinking. And so when we are given the opposite, we sometimes are so focused on protecting ourselves. Like if the opposite is true, then that would mean that my way of thinking is wrong. And so the thing to keep in mind is, as Cate was saying, that isn't necessarily true. Like both can actually be true. And sometimes it's finding that middle ground. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. But we're going to start off with some polarizing type of conversations and talk about some uncomfortable things and talking about us personally, how we believe in our personal lives. Then we're going to get into the business side of things and how we can use this particular tool.
Yeah, I love it. Let's charge full steam ahead, and then just know that if some of these things polarize you, that's kind of the intent. So just get a little uncomfortable with us or vulnerable, and stick in there. We'll be there for you.
That's right. So we want to expand the way that you are thinking on both sides. And so black and white thinking, it's also called sort of dichotomous thinking. And it's really the hallmark of borderline personality disorder. And that's sort of the extreme of black and white thinking. However, we all have topics that we have black and white thinking on. It's just sort of a matter of degree away from those that have a mental disturbance. And I know, Cate, you are familiar with BPD, so borderline personality disorder, and you wanted to share a little bit further thoughts there.
Yeah, so BPD has such a stigma associated with it, but interestingly enough, and my therapist has reminded me of this over the years, but that borderline personality disorder, although it is a serious personality disorder, at the same time, it is one of the only ones that's curable in the way that you can learn or you can be taught to avoid these extremes. And so I love that because there are some disorders or diseases, not some, a lot, that you're just born with, and although with BPD, you might always have that tendency, or that might be your kind of in the back of your mind in some ways. At the same time, there's hope in the way that, if you work on it and you want it, you can learn or teach yourself or be taught ways to handle this. And a lot of it has to do with finding balance, of avoiding those extremes.
Perfect. So, Cate, some of the dichotomous thinking topics, whenever I started thinking about them, that we deal with in our daily lives, I'm going to just point out some of them. So the first one that comes to mind would be politics. That's very polarizing.
Yes.
Currently, we have a war. We have two wars, and there's always wars. So wars in general are very polarizing. It's one side against the other. It's my view versus your view.
Yeah.
Religion can be actually very polarizing as well. And so it's, if you don't believe this way, this will happen to you. If you think this way, if you do these things, these things will happen. Racism, that's very polarizing and has opposite sides of how people think about things. LGBTQIA, that is very polarizing in how people think. And then even like competitors. So what I think about my competition, or what people think about two different types of companies, can be also polarizing.
Yeah, without a doubt. I know for me personally, I have struggled with some of these, especially during times of when it's really relevant, right? Like, so when there's an election, I really struggle with accepting the fact that there are people that don't view things the way I do.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time. I know they exist, and I don't want to, like, but I think they're wrong, right? And I and I have a hard time balancing that and finding the middle ground in my mind. And but interestingly enough, I have a little bit of an easier time on the religion side because I have such an openness. I don't, I have my own beliefs. They too have fluctuated over the years. And so maybe just because of that inconsistency for me, I'm able to be more open to others. I don't know. I'd be interested to know, the audience and what their feelings are on the topic.
Yeah. So I'm going to dive into two of them
Okay.
today. And so these topics are polarizing. And these complex topics are also sometimes very simplified into two opposite extremes or poles of, instead of poles of spectrums. And so the thing to think about as we dive into this is that you might very passionately feel one way or the other. But what we want to sort of point out is it requires you to open yourself up and to start to think about the other side of things as well. And so I'm going to throw out the word politics, and I'm going to throw out the word Trump, and I'm going to throw out the word Biden. And I know that people are already triggered.
Yes.
And so
yes.
For me, I am not a Trump fan. However, that being said, I can still see the benefits of what it is that some of the things that he has done. And so what I tend to find, though, is that people look at a person and say, they are all wrong. They are all bad. Everything, is XYZ. It is this. Or they're saying he is all good. Everything he does is right. And he's never wrong. And the other side is, this other way. And it's the same thing with Biden. Like people are like, oh, if you believe in this, then, you don't believe in our country. It's so really.
Yeah. Right. It's all kind of silly. And in some ways, it doesn't have to be so extreme, but it is really hard for us, right? Especially when we as a people have to vote with only two choices, right? So you end up sometimes voting more against someone rather than for someone, right?
Absolutely.
So that can be super frustrating, because I know in this last election, I, was voting against Trump. That's it. I wasn't voting for Joe Biden, even though I have not been, I've been okay with the administration, but in general, I was really just voting against Trump.
Yeah. So Bruce added a comment here. Tolerance and tolerating diversity of ideas and individuals serve us so well, but unless it comes to things like physically harming each other, we should strive for tolerance. And so,
yeah, I agree, Bruce.
Yeah. And so let's, I'm going to come back to that. I think later on, as we start to get into the tool. And so the other one I have is war. And I know that we have some people that are very passionate about some of the wars that are going on right now. I come from it from a completely different perspective because one, where I grew up, I didn't have any Jewish people that I knew. And then also where I grew up, I didn't have any Palestinian people that I knew growing up. And then not until recently have I actually been connected to someone that actually was a part of Ukraine. Like I didn't know anybody from Ukraine. And then I also have someone that was originally from Russia and they're now Moldova. So it's given me when you start to connect with these people of these different types of backgrounds, you start to gain other perspectives. But if you are born and that is how you grew up, what I'm curious about is, what are the potential things that maybe you were taught something as you were growing up that, oh, it is this way, and they neglected thinking about it on the other side. So sometimes the way we grew up, because we are this one thing that we acknowledge, we're a part of this particular label. And so, Cate, I would also throw, the LGBTQ. You have a certain perspective because this is something you are. And so sometimes thinking maybe about the other side, you're like, that is endangering me. And I can see that could be the same thing with both of these sides. Both of these sides are like, okay, but you are endangering the person that I connect with, that I am.
Right. Right. The very identity that I hold, that's the crux of it in a lot of ways for me. Because there are things, that people of minorities, or, that are different than the mainstream, that struggle with these things. And those topics are super important to them, obviously, because it's a part of their identity. It's who they are. But there's this external pressure and this external opinion about things that people know nothing really about, right? Just like you kind of described, I can imagine people that are born not knowing anything about Jewish culture, right? Not knowing anything about it, like the culture versus the religion, the traditional side. There's a lot of aspects of Judaism that isn't just religious, and it, that can shape you into being closed-minded if you allow it to be on that other extreme versus, a more open-mindedness. For me growing up, my dad he was born and raised Catholic, very Italian, he's first generation American. So, but he was on the wealthier side growing up because his father was a doctor. And he went to a school where there was a lot of diversity because it was a privileged school, and they worked hard to create that. And he was in an area where there were a lot of Jewish people. And so my dad kind of became fascinated with Judaism and almost converted as an adult when we were kids. And then he just didn't want to put the time into it. I think it's like, I could just, but there's, it's really interesting how these different things in our environment kind of expose us to those and create what we are right now in terms of those extremes.
So what I want to do is I don't want to get deep dive into these polarizing topics.
Right.
But I want you to keep them in mind as we start to think about them related to things even related to your business side of things. So I'm going to pull up something here, and this is the tool that is used. And so I'm going to add this to the stage. So when you start to think about things, think of it on a scale of 1 to 10. So 10 being a particular topic, and then what is the opposite of that? That becomes the 1. Then what is the middle? What would the middle ground look like? And so I want us to think about that. And I have an example for us to be able to think about. So hopefully you can see that. I think it might be a little small, but the 10 is hopelessness. For example, I feel hopeless. But then you look at the other side and it's the rose-colored glasses. It's the Pollyannish. So you don't see anything wrong, like everything's perfect. And so then as you start to come back into, like, from Pollyannish, you have optimistic, but then from 10, you have pessimistic. And then in the 5, you have realistic. So you have the middle ground. And so I want us to think about those types of things, but to go back and use this particular chart. So I used this within our company as I was working with some consultants. So here's an example of how it can be used. They came to me and said, the client has come to us and said that they want an aggressive schedule. So the word aggressive is what triggered them. And so what I asked is, okay, so the client wants aggressive. What is the opposite of aggressive? What is it that you're concerned about that if you do an aggressive schedule, what do you feel like will happen? What's the opposite of what that will happen? And I pulled up and I just started doing a whiteboard and I just started drawing these numbers. And they were like, well, I'm concerned that the client will basically be reckless, that we won't be thinking about the things that they need to really take care of. And ultimately it becomes sort of reckless for their business. And I said, okay, so what would you see the middle being? And so they started using words. And what's interesting is that you will have people come up with completely different words. But what the important part is it's defining for this group of people, what is the 10? What is the 1? What is the word that you would consider middle? And then I told them, I said, go back to the client and explain this and then say, okay, you say aggressive. So on this scale of 10 to 1, and then we have 5 in the middle, where would you consider us on this scale? I said, because they may come back to you and say, oh, well, I'm just talking about like 6. Like, I just want a 6 on this scale. That's ultimately what they are considering aggressive, because we have in our mind that aggressive is, we're just being, we're throwing everything to the wind and not thinking about anything. And we just got to get done with it. And so it really helped them to like stop and go, oh, it really is my perception of the word that I'm not sure what the client actually means in this. So this particular tool allowed them to be able to go back and say, okay, let's define what the word aggressive is. Here's what my concern is, because it's all about fear. You are saying aggressive. I'm seeing it as a 10. What I see as the opposite is the 1. And I want to find a middle ground for us.
Yeah, I love this. This can be done in relationships and really anything, right? Because it's about finding the middle ground. It's also about what this example illuminates so well, Sarah, is that it's also about defining and alignment, right? So like if there are 2 signs that are in agreement on what the definition of the places on the scale mean. Wow, that's powerful in and of itself, right? And then on top of it, being able to then find the middle ground.
Yeah. So let's think of another word. So whenever I say the word aggressive, I could say that the opposite is passive.
Right.
And so aggressive and passive, but they said, I think their word was reckless. So you'll notice that the words can be different. So what is the middle ground of passive and aggressive?
Even paced, I guess. I don't know.
For me, it's assertive.
Assertive.
But it's interesting because everyone is different. And so you start to see, okay, well, assertive, you might consider that more still a 7.
Right.
And so it's figuring out those things to be able to get on the same page with each other. But as I've continued to do this with people, it's so enlightening, because ultimately what it's bringing up is the fear that someone has with whatever it is the word is. So now if we look at this and we go back to, for example, the war. So, we have, Israel, we have Palestinians. What is the fear? So for me, I think that the fear is, well, you're going to be destroying people that I am similar to. So, and I was talking with my daughter today, and she was like, well, war just happens. And I'm like, but why does war happen? And I'm like, because people are in their extremes. It's the 10. So, I'm this particular way, and you're basically saying that the people that I relate to don't matter. And then the other side is saying, probably similar things. That's what I don't know. Like, what is the 1? What is the 10? And then how can we that's how you negotiate. How do you find that middle ground to overcome the fear on both sides? Is that possible? Sometimes that's not possible. But is there a way to be able to get to the 5 to address whatever the concerns are on each side? Now, I know this particular war has been going on for centuries, forever. But ultimately, if we as a society don't take time to really think about the 10 and the 1 and look at other perspectives, then we're stuck in a black and white mind of thinking. Like, we're never going to come to a conclusion or a solution to try to find a middle ground in things. Like, so for me, like Trump, I was very triggered whenever he first came out. I've over time, I'm just like, I still don't like him, but I also see certain aspects I'm like, I can understand why someone would be attracted to him. I can see that side. So half of it is also just putting yourself in the other person's shoes to understand that other extreme, to understand their fear. And then also hopefully they're able to understand your fears. And then you're able to come together to figure out, okay, how can we get to a middle ground of understanding and in how it is that we can do something different.
Yeah, completely. I love the tool. I love this both like the client story, something just kind of present in your everyday life, but it applies to both. It applies to something really like typical, and then it applies to these huge things like this war, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, earlier this week, Oscar, our 18-year-old, he called me and we were chatting, and he just brought up this interesting conversation that he's had with one of his best friends. They have completely opposite political views on a few of the key topics. One of them being border control, one of them being abortion. And as Oscar was explaining it, he said, we're very different, and but we understand where each other comes from, and we just agree, that we disagree, but that we both want what's best for other people. And I was like, really? So tell me more about that. And I'll just really quickly, provide a synopsis. But, Oscar's pro-choice, and he has reasons why he believes that that's the best, way in terms of abortion. And his friend, who was born, like his mom was a young mother. His mom was told to get an abortion, and she chose not to. And so he has very different feelings about abortion, in terms of how sacred life is. And same on the topic of border control, because his father was an illegal alien and was terrible to his mother. So he wants better protection because he doesn't want things to happen to other families like what happened to his mother, right? And so for Oscar, who has viewed these things completely, in a lot of ways, very intellectually or through others' experiences, and he still has very passionate beliefs about him, but he was able to put himself in Isaac's shoes and see the difference. And Isaac was able to understand why Oscar felt that way and where they were both coming from. And it was a beautiful thing. Right. And it's great. I didn't even connect that story, to the Goldilocks zone of thinking, even though we've been talking about, this episode for quite a while, but that just happened 2 days ago, this conversation. Yeah. Oscar.
So that's a beautiful story, and it's exactly geared towards this particular topic. So think about those particular topics. And people try to polarize them. It's this or it's this. No, like it is a complex topic, and everyone has nuances and needs that are completely different. And maybe, one side might be needed for one, and for someone else, it might need to be the other. Why does it have to be it? So the Goldilocks way of thinking is when you think that it is a this or this scenario, it must be this or it must be this. No, it's a very nuanced topic. Everything, for the most part, is pretty nuanced, depending on the perspective of the person that you're talking to.
Right. Yes. Something can be straightforward yet risky, right? Mm-hmm. Like a balance beam. That's what, I was thinking about in that poem, it's very straightforward. It's very linear, but it's narrow. So there's fucking risk on both sides, right?
Yes. I think that's exactly it, is that even though I might consider something safe, it might not actually be. It might actually be risky, or something that people consider, I may consider it risky, but something I'm willing to do, where other people are like, no way in hell I would do that. And so it's just making us rethink how it is that we approach topics. So instead of always thinking it must be this is the right way, step back. And half of it is being able to really step back and self-analyze yourself to say, okay, am I looking at this in a black and white way? Okay, what would the opposite be? And then what would the middle ground be? And they actually use this in counseling, by the way, with like relationships and things like that. So,
right. You can apply that to anything if you so choose, because there's always an extreme, right, on both sides. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about, and maybe to do some reading about. There are other countries that operate in a more balanced way, where they have taken some of these polarizing issues and they have figured out a way to find the middle ground, and that the laws don't necessarily need to be reinforcing an extreme position. That there can be societal norms and laws that will guide us towards the middle path. Like New Zealand and Australia have some really interesting ways of governing that are really pretty balanced. And I feel like the rest of the world hasn't quite caught on yet. And there are some other, there's some other, I think in the UK, or there's other countries that are doing this, but in a lot of ways, I think here in the U.S. we just get too stuck on the polarizing side. It's a huge topic, right? Like we can't find middle of the aisle.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring up Bruce's comment. I was brought up. I'm a very anti-intellectual, and I think it means in an anti-intellectual environment. So I had to remove myself to get outside, limiting the information to reinforce an emotional-driven position. I mean, that's it. It's emotional. So I'm going to give a couple of other examples. So let's say that someone comes to you and they say, there's just so much that could go wrong. I feel like if I relax and let up my guard, that something will sneak up on me. And so when you think about that, they're focused on all the things that could go wrong. So
the fear.
Exactly. So the question then becomes, is it possible to be careful and prudent without being so anxious about things? Because ultimately they're feeling anxious. They're worried about the things that can go wrong. So, can you also be careful and prudent at the same time? And so it's as you are talking with people and they throw out specific words, it's understanding what do they mean. And I know we can't really have this conversation with Bruce, but one of the earlier things he said is tolerance and tolerating diversity of ideas and individuals serve us so well. So it's interesting because sometimes what I have been hearing from other individuals is tolerance is basically, or diversity of ideas. A lot of times people don't like the spectrum, don't like the different ways to think about them. And I'm going to throw out another one, which has to do with like gender identity. There are people that are like, no, you're a boy or you're a girl. Okay. But do you really understand how it is that this person is feeling? Have there been situations where people have transitioned and they found out later on they felt like if they had known everything, they wouldn't have done it? Yes. Are there people that have transitioned and then said, this is the best thing for me? Yes. So both can happen in the same type of topic. So the real thing that people have to think about is it is individualistic. It is something that is related to each person, and it's getting that person to understand all of the possibilities that are related to it. So what are the pros of potentially transitioning from a girl to a boy or a boy to a girl? What are the negative aspects? So sometimes we're so concerned about saying, well, there's mental health or people might commit suicide if they don't transition. Well, the opposite can be true as well. There have been people that transitioned and then they found that it was something that they regretted and then start to think about suicide on the other side. So it really can, it is such, all topics for me, I have found the more that I think I know, the more I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the topic of that type of transitioning is, it's a hard one for a lot of people to understand or wrap their mind around.
Yeah.
But if they put themselves in somebody else's shoes, you know, what I like to tell someone is, you know, okay, so you are squarely a man, right? You feel like a man, you know, that resonates with you. You are so sure of that, right?
Right. You can't imagine anybody being different.
Right. Right. Well, what if you weren't? Like, what if you were a man on the outside, but you were really sure you should have been something different on the inside? You know, like, as sure as you are that you are a man, you have to believe that the opposite can be true, right? Like that there is a yin and yang. And so then you have to imagine what it would be like to be that sure of something that is not the norm, right?
Yeah. So as a man, imagine people coming up to you and calling you ma'am and saying you're a girl. Like, as sure as you feel like you are a man, people are like, no, you're not a man, you're a girl. And they just are constantly calling you that. How would you then feel? Because you know deep down, like, no, I'm a man. Like, what is wrong with you? And so it's the same way of people that are cisgender. You know within you who you are. Why is it that you can't accept how people of something else? And I find it interesting because a lot of times people are like, oh, why are we, you know, everything's a spectrum now. Like everything, you know, has to be, you know, it can't just be black and white. Well, because life isn't black and white.
And it's always been that way. It's just as we grow and age, you know, we talk about more things and define things more, but there have been, you know, these elements in society forever. It's just we weren't necessarily talking about it. It wasn't exposed enough for.
Yeah. But I really love this tool. I love it for not only the personal side of things. I almost feel like I need to just have a graphic that says, okay, I'm going to pull up this graphic, you know, in this conversation, and let's just have this conversation to talk about these two different ideas of things. And I really loved it within the business side of things as well, because it really allows you to have a more deep conversation with your client, or dealing with the fears that we have internally about things, because ultimately nobody wants failure. And I will also add in another area of people that tend to have black and white thinking is perfectionism. So people that must be perfectionists. And so I think of Ricky Bobby, you're either first or you're last. It can't be anything else. So if I have any minor flaws in what it is that I have, then I am a failure. And so instead of just looking at what I've done could be good, what I've done so far is a great accomplishment, they throw all of it out and say, oh, it's all shit. You know, it's all bad, you know, because I wasn't perfect.
Right. You look for those people in your lives because they exist. They on the surface look like they may be lazy or look like they may not be driven to accomplish. But when you dig in, I've done this with a few people in my life. When you dig in, what's really there is fear of not being perfect.
Right.
So an inability to try because perfection is where it needs to be, and anything less than that isn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
So look for those people and try to get them to define perfection and define the middle ground and help them with this tool, because they're out there. And like I said, they're kind of showcasing as somebody that isn't driven, but they are just afraid typically.
Yeah. So Bruce added something else. He said, as pertains to tolerance and diversity, I believe that they are not just beneficial, but necessary to support our nation's beautiful desire to expand to the greatest possible degree individual freedom. So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talk about it all the time. We clearly as a nation don't yet know how to execute it, but we need to find the middle path. We need to reach across the aisle. We need to make some compromises, and we need to find the middle zone, because that is the sweet spot.
Yeah. For me, it is less about controlling people in doing things that we think is right, and more about teaching people about tools like this. To me, if we were to focus on anything, it would be helping people to see other sides and helping them with the emotional. Like if we did anything as a nation, for me, it would be on the mental side of things. It would be helping people. Like if we really wanted to help with, like, because when you focus on that, you are dealing with all kinds of issues. You're dealing with mental health. You're dealing with the firearms issues. You're dealing with war. You're dealing with poverty. You're dealing, like when you start to deal with mental health, that is all encompassing, helping all kinds of different types of issues. Now that might be black and white thinking, but I see a connection to all of these types of things. I see the spoke going from that if we really just focus on how can we help people to not have black and white thinking, how can we get them to see the middle ground, how can we help them with their mindset of why they shouldn't necessarily look at themselves as all bad or all good. That is really what will help us as a society. And I got to tell you, that is why, for me, I wanted to do BOYBAS, because I saw that I can't impact things. Me saying I am pro-choice doesn't matter, because I see the other side. And then as I started to dive into this, I was like, you know what? I can only influence or only help people that I know. I can't help anybody else that has no exposure to me. There's really nothing I can do. But what I can do is try to help people to think beyond themselves and to think in ways of how they can also help themselves. How can we help each other love ourselves? How can we help each other forgive ourselves and forgive others? To me, that is ultimately the point of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes, it's like you almost took the words right out of my mouth, Sarah.
That's awesome.
As we were talking right before you got to the summary, I was like, what this is all about. It's about loving yourself and loving each other.
Yes.
And, despite differences, that's what it's all about. That's why you have to be driven to find the middle ground because of love and kindness, to yourself and everyone around you.
Absolutely. So I think I'm going to end it with this. So he said, exactly, Sarah, we need to help people find themselves and put that first. And so with that, some of the things to think about is when you even just putting yourself first, sometimes people, when you think about the opposite, what does that potentially mean? Well, does that mean that you're not putting other people first? So it's thinking about even words just like that. We can think about the potential opposite of that. Why can't we have both? Why can't we have taking care of ourselves and also helping others? I love the word and versus or. We can help ourselves and help others.
Right. And in some areas in society, we've coined terms that do that, right? We all know about the work-life balance, right?
Yep.
Like that's a common thing that we talk about, right? Find your balance, right?
Yep. And
why can't we talk about a hate-love balance when it comes to gay people? What? I'm sorry.
Oh, and I just wanted to point out he had the word and, by the way. We need to help people find themselves and put that first and put ourselves first, hopefully, as well. So sorry, you were saying.
I mean, it's just, we can find a balance, or we can talk about balance as a society because we have around certain terms, right? Like the work-life thing. But when we tend to exclude other items that are more polarizing rather than just finding the balance and figuring out a way to talk about it differently.
Yeah. I love it. So
I love it too.
Middle ground, Goldilocks, just right. Not too hot, not too cold.
This one's just right. Not too hard, not too soft.
Exactly.
Just right.
Just right.
and that is badass, right? Because in and of itself, when these things are polarizing and you are pushing yourself toward a middle ground, you're kind of carving a new path. It's badass to push for something that balances the extremes, because that's not necessarily usually the popular way.
Yep, exactly. I do have to tell you, it was quite surreal and touching that when I was at ProjectCon, I can't tell you how many people came up and were talking about you and me, and they were just like, oh yeah, I need to introduce you to Sarah. She's badass. Like, I was like, oh shit. I'm like, I've rebranded myself. I'm now just known as badass.
It's not a bad thing to be known as, I don't think. But
so I said amazing. The same thing about you as well. Someone asked me, and I understood as I was listening to them, I understood why they were asking. But at first I was like, oh, they asked about you. They were like, does Cate have cancer? And I said, no. I go, no, she's just a badass. I'm like, she just has her head shaved. She has a tattoo in the back. And they were like, oh, and they started talking about themselves and how they had dealt with cancer. So they were like relating. They thought that was something that you were dealing with because that's something they had dealt with. But I was just like, no, I'm like, she's just a badass.
Yeah, it is one of the things, that I do. One of the reasons why I do like being bald is I for women that have hair loss for other reasons or whatever, I like the whole, example of you can be whatever you want. And just because you're a woman doesn't mean you have to have hair.
Yeah.
You just don't. So
I agree. But I also got my hair done a little bit more, by the way.
It's great.
And it really was popping at the conference, especially in the ice bar. And I had so many people that came up to me and they were like, I love your hair. They were like, I want to do that. And I was like, well, let me be your inspiration. Like, do it. What's holding you back?
Right. I think next year before ProjectCon, you should do red. Have you ever done red? That would be, I know you've done like a pink, but I think you should do a red. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I didn't know whether that would complement and so we talked about that. So my daughter was going to do red, and she, for whatever reason, she almost didn't speak up. And she said something that made me and the hairdresser like question. We were like, okay, but is this what you're wanting? She's like, well, you've already gotten the color. And we're like, no. Like she was like, I can get this to, I can have someone else will take it. She was like, if you don't want this, then don't do it. And so then it was giving her permission to be able to say no. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is a great moment. I'm like, Riley. And I'm like, you should always feel comfortable in saying no. Like if you feel a particular way, you don't want to do something, you shouldn't do it just because you feel obligated.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you spoke up. So I was trying to instill in her, thank you for stepping up and telling us how it is that you felt. And then we just didn't do it. But I was considering getting the red. I was like, oh, should I do the red, for Full Sail versus I feel like this is more Deltec. The teal. And I was like, no, I said, we'll try it. And I said, we'll do it next and we'll see what it looks like because I'm willing to do something different. But we decided not to do it.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
totally. Well, we have had a very lovely and robust conversation today. I really appreciate Bruce and others that have kind of stepped in and kind of, interacted with us. We always love to hear what you guys are thinking. Yes. And hopeful that you all will go on and have a badass weekend. Hope this type of conversation fuels your Friday. Bruce said next year, purple. Purple must be his favorite color. Yeah, you have done purple.
Yeah. And so I have done purple. I did purple, pink, and the teal all at one time. Yeah. I had like just a pink strand. And so.
Yeah. I remember that. It was really pretty.
Yeah. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I love this topic, Cate. I hope that people will use this tool beyond just their work environment, but thinking about it beyond as they're talking with friends or family and things like that, but also especially within the business side, bringing it up and having that conversation with clients to really get on the same page.
Yep. Our employees, whatever needs to be done. A lot of times we are qualitative, we want to provide quality work to our audience, to our, our, whoever we're, but at the end of the day, it still needs to be measured in some way, right? Mm-hmm. We still need to point at it and say, there it is. And that's how we know it's there. So, putting the work in the front end to define and align and discover what that middle path is, that'll just make the measuring at the end easier.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to end with this. Have a great, badass day. Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Myra. I hope everyone has a great weekend. I know I'm looking forward to my massage tomorrow, to recoup from this week and to be refreshed for Monday.
Yes. I have a great weekend planned as well. I'll tell you all about it next week, guys.
Awesome.
But take good care.
Real quick, next week, Halloween special. So I haven't posted it yet, but I'm going to be pushing it out. We have some special things planned, and then we have several speakers in November. So we'll get that out as well.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting month as we come into the end of the year. We're going to kick the end of 2023's ass and get ready for a great 24.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.